right, well, for this month we're looking at the traditional Advent themes leading up to Christmas Day, and last week was hope, and today we're going to be talking about peace, because peace on earth is probably one of the most common expressions that we hear at Christmas. It's in the songs, it's on the cards we send, it's in the stories we tell, it's on the Christmas TV shows. When has there ever been peace on earth? That's a tough question, you know. Look at this. Isn't that amazing? So innocent, beautiful, peaceful. It's hard to believe when you see it like this that at this very moment, I hate to make you have to think about this, but at this very moment there are over a dozen places on this planet that are involved in some form of armed conflict right now. But from way out in space, you can't tell where one country leaves off, another one begins, except maybe for the rivers and the coastlines in some places. There are no boundaries, no divisions. Those things exist in our consciousness. When we see things from the perspective of space, we have to join the astronauts who had that same experience, and each and every one of them come back and they say, what is there to fight over? And yet, here's some statistics. Get ready for this. In over the last 4,000 years of recorded history, there have been only 268 years of peace on earth. 14,351 wars, killed 3.6 billion people. In the last 300 years, there have been 286 wars in Europe alone. Ah, Reverend Mark, the old holiday bummer talk, right? I can see it on your faces right now, huh? Anyone getting depressed yet? Have I succeeded in my mission this morning to bring the energy way, way down? That'll do it. I'm telling it like it is. You know, that's what the statistics show out there. Peace on earth is a dream, it's a vision, it's something we dare to hope at this time of year. And the theme of peace on earth, well, you heard part of it this morning when Lynn Laney shared the daily word with us. There was the passage from Isaiah, where already back in the days of the ancient Hebrew scriptures, they were waiting for this Messiah who was going to come and was going to be a figure of peace. Other prophets thought he was going to be more like some kind of an imperial warlord or a king or something like that. But one of the most common ideas was that he was going to be a priestly and a peaceful person. And then we see in the Gospel of Luke the story of the angels appearing to the shepherds after the birth, and they start singing, peace on earth, goodwill to all whom God favors, or various translations on that, peace on earth, goodwill to humankind and things like that. And of course, when you go back and look at the statistics showing how much peace on earth, or I should say how little peace on earth there have been, you have to conclude that perhaps God doesn't really favor too many of us on this planet, because again, there just hasn't been that much peace on earth. Okay, so maybe there hasn't been a lot of peace on earth, but let's look at the positive side of things, because here we are being invited once a year, should be more often than that, but at least once a year, to consider the possibility and what our role might be in bringing that about. I mean, at what other time of year do we, it's something that's institutionalized in this country and other places around the world, at what other time of year do we celebrate generosity and the idea of peace to the level that we do at Christmas? We set aside an entire season where those are the values that we celebrate. We have that. And that's a good place to start. We have to start somewhere. Even if it seems like we're starting over and over again, we need this reminder. It's crucial. There really is such a thing as Christmas spirit. Not talking about Marley's Ghost or the rum in your eggnog. I mean a state of mind. And you all know what it is. It's an attitude. It starts when we're children. I think for the most part, people have happy memories of Christmas. There's something that hangs on. And the season has this interesting way of triggering those childhood memories. It can bring all those overwhelming childhood memories flooding back. Something as simple as I don't know what it is for you, a scent of pine needles, cookies baking, a particular song on the radio or on TV, something like that. It brings the feelings back. It sets off these powerful emotions and then can actually bring about a change in behavior. And I say even if it's temporary, it's a good thing because we begin to imprint that on what they call our neural netways in our brain. That's how we make lasting changes. Great example of how that works was something that actually happened almost 100 years ago now during World War I on a battlefield in northern France, the winter of 1914 in Flanders. There had been some terrible bloody trench warfare going on. The Germans had been in some fierce battles with the British and the French, and both sides, of course, you've heard about trench warfare, living literally in these deep, muddy, nasty trenches, coming out to shoot at each other and then going back in and doing this over and over and over again. Well, on the night of Christmas Eve, 1914, German troops began to put out small Christmas trees lit with candles outside of their trenches. The German troops weren't that far from home, so they were able to get some packages and things like that from home. That's how they got the trees and the candles. And then they began to sing Christmas songs. Now they were singing in German, so the British and French soldiers may not have quite understood the words, but the melodies were familiar. So they started singing along in their own language from the two opposing trenches. The songs going back and forth. Sights, sounds, memories, transforming consciousness. They got the idea of stopping for a while. A truce. Both sides communicated this idea as best they could. Let's just stop for a while and celebrate Christmas. By daybreak, the no man's land between the trenches was filled with troops from both sides. They were sharing whatever they had, cake, cognac, tobacco, postcards. In a few places there are stories about how they made some makeshift soccer balls that they kicked around in football games. It's a true story. The truce lasted until about New Year's Day, and that's when the generals decided that you can't have too much of this peace stuff, you know. Yeah, it might catch on. Huh? The generals decided that they better start shooting again under penalty of court-martial. But for a while there, Christmas changed people. Something triggered those memories, and we know how powerful memories are. And what is a memory but another example of a thought? Thoughts are powerful. For a short while there, they had peace on earth in a very unlikely place. So what's stopping the rest of us? There's a Scottish poet, Frederick Niven, wrote a poem called A Carol from Flanders, which is all about this event. And the poem ends with these simple words. He says, "O ye who read this truthful rhyme from Flanders, kneel and say, God speed the time when every day shall be as Christmas Day." And World War I went on for another 4 years, and there never was another Christmas truce. Maybe it's true what they say that peace is harder to make than war, but it sure is worth the effort. If Christmas spirit can bring a world war to a screeching halt, we need to bottle that stuff. Every day shall be as Christmas Day. Not a bad idea. Now, of course, somebody with the attitude of that Christmas character we know as Scrooge. Someone with a Scrooge attitude might look at the story and say, a lot of sentimental hogwash. Actually, that's Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life who said sentimental hogwash. Scrooge would say humbug, right? He'd say humbug. Just a lot of feel-good nostalgia. That's what caused the truce. There was no permanent change, but so what? So what if it was just feel-good nostalgia? So what if it was that? Is that such a small thing? I don't think so. How can we say there was no permanent change? We keep telling the story, right? We keep telling it because it's a message of hope, which was the theme from last week. They go together. One supports the other. I think even a temporary shift in consciousness is something to celebrate. Christmas tells us that it's okay to be optimistic. People can change. All it takes is a few people to embrace that kind of transformation. In fact, it is absolutely amazing what a difference even one person, one transformed consciousness can make when it comes to peace in the world. I was right in the middle of writing this talk when I heard the news about Nelson Mandela. And of course I did a little bit of research, and of course one of his quotes here is, "May your choices reflect your hopes." There we go again, hope. May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears. He fought against oppression. He went to prison for it for 27 years. Look at his cell here. I think that's the next slide I have up. That's the place that he had to live for a long time, with a mat on the floor, a place to put his head. That bucket in the corner is the toilet. And you've got a bench there that, I don't know, that have to serve as your writing desk or whatever. He could have one visitor every 6 months, one piece of mail every 6 months. That was during the worst of his incarceration out there on Robben Island. That was his life for almost 27 years. And then in the mid-70s, well, the world around South Africa started changing. Actually, going back farther than that, into the 60s, there was a massacre in South Africa, and then there was an uprising in Soweto, which led to international sanctions, which finally led to the repeal of the segregation laws in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela was finally released from prison. And the rest of the world was absolutely certain of what was going to happen next. The rest of the world knew what would happen next. Revenge, retribution, violence, bloodshed across the entire country. After all, what could possibly happen? What else could possibly happen after hundreds of years of brutal oppression at the hands of a white minority? Well, the oppressed would rise up. They'd have their revenge. An eye for an eye. A tooth for a tooth, because that's the way the rest of the world seemed to operate. But Nelson Mandela and his supporters, many of whom were white all along, had a different idea. He came from a culture that believed in fighting, but not revenge. Truth and reconciliation. Those were the values. He said, as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. There you have it. After centuries of oppression, what he believed in was freedom, and that no one, white or black, should dominate the other. As long as you're focused on revenge, it is impossible to be free. And that's what he knew to the very core of his being. And because he was such a respected and revered figure in South Africa, he became the face of truth and reconciliation, partnering with Bishop Desmond Tutu. And it worked. South Africa has a long way to go economically. But they avoided that worst case scenario that many people around the world were sure was going to happen. They gave peace a chance, and Nelson Mandela sold it. Now, the good news in all of this, after I gave you all those depressing statistics at the beginning, the good news is that this is not an exception. It is the trend. Next year is an auspicious occasion. It's going to be the 100-year anniversary of the Christmas truce of World War I. And on that anniversary, we can say it now and we'll be able to say it next year. We can say conclusively that the world is a far less violent place than it was 100 years ago. And what better tribute can we give to the people that have worked so hard for peace and made that truce into a reality? Experts in international relations who study war and peace in the world have noticed that for around 500 years, European nations would start 2 new wars a year. That's why that statistic about all the wars in Europe was so high. European nations would start 2 new wars a year. In 1945, it stopped. And since that time, war between developed countries has ceased to exist. That's a big deal. Homicide rates have dropped like a stone since the Dark Ages. Violence in all of its forms have been dropping. And I'll give you the research here. All you need to do is find this book, The Better Angels of Our Nature by psychologist Steven Pinker. He tells us in this book how violence has declined. This guy's an atheist, but he manages to get angels, peace, and hope into this book. It's amazing. All of this here supports our basic position in unity, where we choose to look for the good. Being pessimistic and distracted, and boy oh boy, are there plenty of distractions to keep us from looking at the things in the world that perhaps we don't want to look at. Being pessimistic and distracted is no way to go through life. Instead of focusing all the time on what's wrong with the world, where all the war and the poverty is, let's look at what's right with the world for a change. Doesn't mean we ignore the bad stuff. We're not going to live in a state of denial, but let's make sure we don't get fixated on the bad stuff. There was a story written by Catherine Marshall about not getting fixated on the bad stuff. It's the story of a king who once offered a prize to the artist who could paint the best picture of peace. And all these artists came together and they tried to capture peace in a painting. And then the king looked at all the pictures, but out of all the pictures there were only 2 that he really liked, and he had to choose between them. Now, one picture was of a calm lake, and the lake was this perfect mirror for peaceful, towering mountains all around it. Overhead was this beautiful blue sky with fluffy white clouds, and everyone who saw this picture thought that it was the perfect picture of peace. Well, the other picture, it had mountains too, but these were rugged and bare. Above it was an angry sky from which rain fell and lightning played, and down the side of the mountain tumbled a foaming waterfall that didn't look very peaceful at all. But when the king looked closely at this picture, he saw that behind the waterfall was this tiny bush growing in a crack in the rock. And in the bush, a mother bird had built her nest. And there, in the midst of the rush of this dangerous, angry water, sat the mother bird on her nest in perfect peace. Guess which picture won? The king chose the second picture and explained his choice by saying, peace does not mean to be in a place where there is no noise, trouble, or hard work. Peace means to be in the midst of all those things and still be calm in your heart. That's the real meaning of peace. So it's from that state of consciousness, and I would suggest from that state of consciousness only, that we're going to make the golden rule into a reality. That's the role that love plays in the Advent story. That's our topic for next week. Hope to see you then. Thank you.